Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining the Conservation Fund today for a gathering with some of our conservation experts. My name is Lucas Bladen, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm a member of the fund's development team where I work to build support for our mission and spread awareness of the importance of conservation. Please note that we're going to be recording today's session to share with some folks who weren't able to join us. So if you got that notice when you joined, that's why. And I'm excited to just be surrounded by so many friends of the fund who likely come from all around the country and have found their passion for conservation in all sorts of different ways. Here at the Conservation Fund, what we do, the heart of what we do is land protection, which we couple with economic development, and that's for to ensure things like greater public access to nature, strengthen economies at the community level, and enhance climate resiliency. And that really is our dual mission that defines us. And I'm thrilled to be talking with all of you at this particular moment, because we're actually rapidly approaching 9 million acres of conserved land across all 50 states since our founding in 1985, and that includes 134 projects last year alone, which is really incredible. We're always looking for ways to deepen our impact across even more communities and geographies, and it's so hard to find in a short set of projects a way to really capture the span and breadth of our work. But today we're going to be trying to do that. I'm showing you just how broad and impactful conservation can be across the country. I'll be talking about everything from coastal resiliency in California, creating stronger food systems in Illinois, and partnering with descendants of civil rights activists to protect historic lands in Alabama. But it's our conservation experts who lead that on a daily basis. And today I'm joined here by Emmy Brawley, Steve Hobbs, and Philip Howard. And I'd love to actually just let them introduce themselves before we dive into presentations. So Emmy, Steve, and Philip, could you please just quickly introduce yourselves and let us know which projects you'll be discussing?
Sure. Thanks, Lucas. Hi, everyone. Emmy Brawley here. I'm based in Chicago, Illinois, and I head up the Great Lakes and Illinois State Office, and I'll be talking about the Working Farms Fund.
Hi, folks. Hey. Steve Hobbs. I am based down in San Diego. I'm the California State Director. I also work in Hawaii, and I'm going to be talking about our project by Watsonville in the Pajaro Valley.
And hello, everyone. I am Philip Howard, and I am in the great state of Alabama. And I will be talking to you all today about our Civil Rights People and Places program, where we are helping protect African-American heritage sites across the state of Alabama. Thank you all for joining.
All right, wonderful. And we're really excited to hear more from each of you throughout the hour. And after the completion of the 3 presentations, we'll have plenty of time left over for questions and conversation with the full group. But if you have anything really pressing or something you'd like to make sure we get to at the end, feel free to use the chat along the way. We're happy to monitor that. And with that, I think Emmy will pass it off to you to hear more about the Working Farms Fund's efforts in Illinois.
Thanks. So if anyone just joined us, I'm Emmy Brawley. I'm based in Chicago for the Conservation Fund. So Lucas mentioned the Conservation Fund's dual mission. We're chartered for both land and water conservation and sustainable economic development. So as you might expect, that leads to a lot of work with working lands, farms, forests, and ranches, where we really can deliver in both our mission areas of land and water health and strong local economies. In fact, of the almost 9 million acres that we've protected across the country, over 3.5 million acres of those are working lands. So I wanted to share with you a new program centered on working lands protection that we've just launched here in Chicago last year. It's called the Working Farms Fund. And the next slide has a quick overview of the, well, that's an overview of the fund. We can move forward. So I thought we would just share quickly what the Farms Fund is and why we need this program, how it works and how we work with partners, the long-term community benefits to this work, and also looking forward our vision and goals for the program. So to set the stage, many of you probably know that the farmland transfer system in the US is really not working. For decades, farmland changed hands by being passed down generation to generation. But today, many of yesterday's farm kids are choosing not to come back to the farm, and our farmer population is aging. Average age of farmers in the US is 58 years old. And we're also seeing a lot of farmland loss across the country through conversion to development and non-farm uses. In Illinois alone, we've lost 3.6 million acres of farmland since 1950. And nationally, just in the hour that we're talking, we'll lose 175 acres of farmland. Fortunately, there is a new generation of farmers. They are young, ambitious, and diverse, who want to farm and are specifically interested in new kind of niche markets, high value markets, sustainable practices, and food production for a community. However, most of these farmers did not grow up on farms. They will never inherit a farm, and they have to find farmland on their own. And we know from national research that finding access to farmland is the #1 challenge facing these farmers. And it's the #1 reason that farmers leave the sector, because they can't find affordable and secure farmland. So we designed a response to these pressing national challenges. And the next slide has a quick overview of our Working Farms Fund program. We're addressing farmland access and business support for next generation farmers. It is a national program that we're designing. It's anchored intentionally around metro areas. And the goal is to create a patient path to land ownership while increasing the supply of healthy, fresh food for our metro areas. And what's exciting to me is that this is really a scalable program and a replicable program. So we're just getting started, but we have big goals. The next slide gives you a quick overview of how it works. We're calling it Buy, Support, Protect, Sell. So farmers enter the program with a business plan that shows how they want to scale their production on 20 acres or more. And then the Conservation Fund works with them to find a farm anywhere from 20 acres up to 500 acres. We buy the farm from a willing seller, and then that farmer gets immediate access to the ground under a flexible lease, along with an exclusive option to buy the farm from us in 3 to 5 years. While we own the farm, we help that farmer scale production and build their business. We're providing support for farm infrastructure, coordinating with local partners around other training and technical assistance, and providing access to new markets. Also, while we own the farm, we raise conservation capital to place a permanent farmland conservation easement on the land. So that makes sure that we have a permanent conservation outcome, that the time and resources that we've invested in that farm are going to stand the test of time. And then that allows us also to sell the farm to a farmer at its reduced agricultural value. So we've removed the development rights with the conservation easement, which creates an element of affordability. And then we take, because we're using a revolving fund model, we take the sale proceeds from one farm and roll it back into the next. So in that support side of the Buy, Support, Protect, Sell, our program is really integrated into these robust regional networks that are advancing food system transformation. So in Chicago, we're partnering with USDA, the US Department of Agriculture, to invest in kind of the on-farm infrastructure that you need to produce food, things like wells and fencing, greenhouses, irrigation. We're also working with partners like Compeer to develop creative and low-cost financing options for farmers so they can start to access small loans and build their credit history and ability to be ready to buy the farm from us in 3 to 5 years. We're also providing business planning support to make sure the farmers have thriving farm businesses and are also ready to buy the farm from us. And then we have conservation partners supporting permanent conservation outcomes. Then, on the market side, we're working with market and procurement partners to break new ground with things like forward contracts, long-term commitments to really get those farmers set up with a system and market outlets that are going to support that business success. So what are the benefits to the communities of this type of work? I pulled out 3. The first one is that we have very strong emphasis on equity in the program. So far, 75% of the farmers that we have in the program are either farmers of color or women farmers, and we're very excited about the opportunity for this program to help farmers that have really not been able to access farm support programs and market opportunities and access to capital based on decades of exclusion. We see this program as a real opportunity to help create pathways and new relationships through this sort of patient pathway to land ownership. The other benefit is really climate resiliency. We know that these long and narrow supply chains where our food is coming from really far away through just a couple of different sources, these supply chains are very high at risk for disruption. So by having multiple shorter supply chains and food grown close to where people live, it really does make the entire region more resilient. And then I think the third community benefit I wanted to pull out is really around jobs and local economies. The vision for the Farms Fund really is a network of small and mid-sized farms, sort of creating clusters of aligned economic opportunity in different subregions of our metro area, which will create new business opportunities and more employment opportunities. And the whole program really does lower the barrier to entry for young entrepreneurs looking to start entrepreneurial farm businesses. I'll just flag this photo of Love is Love Farm, which was the first farm in the program actually in Metro Atlanta. They are on track to do $500,000 in sales, and they've started a whole new enterprise around wholesale that the land that they were able to get access to through the program has really fully enabled. So I think I have a quick story about Chicago. Well, here we are. Here's the total program to date, 10 farms, 745 acres, serving about 40 farmers. And so far we've invested about $7 million in farm purchases. And I did just want to share one story about one of our farmers in Chicago. His name is Deshaun Willingham, and his business is Chicago Urban Farm Solutions. He was actually driving about an hour and a half each way to get access to 5 acres of farm ground that he was renting. And through the Farms Fund program, we were able to put him on 20 acres, about a half an hour south of downtown Chicago. And it's land that he will someday own. He has just told me that he's just hired an accountant, which is really exciting for a small business to hire their first accountant. He was just approved for a tractor loan, which is very exciting since he came into the program with poor credit and is working on repairing that. And Midwest Foods, which is a produce distributor here in Chicago, is going to come to the farm and pick up produce from him. So he's now eliminated delivery as another task that he has to manage. So his business is off to the races, and we just couldn't be happier for him. In terms of the whole program, what's next? We are looking at geographic expansion. There's some of the areas where we're in active conversations with other local partners about how we might be able to bring the program to them. And in Chicago, we're really just getting started. 2 farms, total of 50 acres. But over the next decade, we can really imagine 30, 40, 50 farms impacting thousands of acres and supporting hundreds of entrepreneurial small farm businesses. So when I think about that across multiple regions of the country, I really think that is food system transformation. So thank you so much for listening to a bit about our program, and I look forward to the conversation to follow.
Great. Thanks so much, Emmy. And I will note there's a link to a really incredible video on about the entire Farms Fund program's history and vision that's linked here. Obviously, we can't access it here, but I'm going to make sure that you all are sent that afterwards. I'd really encourage you to watch the full thing. And Steve, we will pass it next to you.
Thanks, Lucas. And we're going to go over to California. And this area that we're working is pretty close to Santa Cruz, California. Folks know where that is. And this is the Pajaro Valley. The Pajaro River runs about 74 miles from its headwaters near Sargent Ranch, which is a big project that we're working on, and then eventually into Monterey Bay. If you look at the map, you'll see some of the projects again that we're working on. Garrett Ranch is a project that we did about 4 years ago, and similar to what Emmy is talking about, it was about 180 acres of strawberry fields. And for those familiar with agriculture in the greater Watsonville area, about 90% of our strawberries domestically are grown in and around Watsonville. So it's a relatively small area, but incredibly productive. And because of that, incredibly valuable agricultural lands that is also threatened by development that is kind of oozing its way down from the Silicon Valley. So this is a project area that we're working on in conjunction with the Land Trust of Santa Cruz County. Garrett Ranch was the first project we did where we acquired the property that was for sale. It's relatively expensive, as I mentioned, about $70,000 an acre is what this farmland goes for, which puts it out of reach of some of the local farmers in the farming community that is underserved in the area. So the idea was to acquire Garrett Ranch, put a conservation easement on it, and then turn around and sell it to a consortium of farmers from the area. And we did that in conjunction with the Land Trust of Santa Cruz County and a private equity firm called Dirt Capital. So with the success of Garrett Ranch, we're now working on the Ocean Mist project, which is about 263 acres, as well as a project known as the Confluence Project. And you'll see in the next slide why these projects are also so important, and their protection and the protection of the ag there is also important. This is the Pajaro River, and you're looking a little bit to the northeast towards the Santa Lucia Mountains. So you're looking kind of upstream. And if you look at the cursor, can go straight south, straight down on the there, right there. Go north. Thank you, Rachel. Right where the river comes together, that's where the Confluence Project is. So this is the area that was prior to the flooding that happened that was catastrophic for the town of Pajaro and the whole valley this past March. Some of you may know, we got a lot of rain in California. So if you can go to the next slide, you can see the same valley after the flooding. So this is looking now back downstream, back towards the bay, and all of those farm fields underwater when the Pajaro River flooded. Next slide, please. And you can see there was actually they were trying to fix, it was just one levee breach that occurred that started all of that flooding. That levee breach was near the Confluence property. And the way the levees were designed back in the day, they were designed to protect some of the agricultural lands, and with the sacrifice of the town of Braro, which is populated by most of the folks that work in the fields in and around Watsonville. Next slide, please. So here we're zeroing in on the Ocean Mist property in particular. This is right at the mouth of the Braro. So this is an interesting project, and it's a project that folks in the area have been working on for some time. The idea with this project is not only to protect the agricultural lands that are so valuable, but also to do a lot of riparian restoration, wetland restoration right at the mouth of the Braro. The lands to the south of the property, the ag lands, really are threatened not only from enhanced storm events that we have, but also just from sea level rise and saltwater intrusion. So working with scientists that have been working on this issue for, again, a long time, there is a path to be able to do some of the wetland restoration at the mouth to help to absorb some of those storm events and have essentially an organized retreat away from the more impacted areas and still preserve the agricultural lands. So that's our intention with the Ocean Mist property that we have under contract. We should close hopefully in the next few months. We still have some private fundraising to do to make this project successful, but it's on a great path, and folks in the community are very excited about this being a model for what we can do in the future when it comes to climate resiliency, as well as preserving our food security and our food systems. Next slide, please. And now if we go back upstream to the confluence property, that's the area in orange. That's the area that is right adjacent to the Braro. And this is the area where the levee failed. And now we're working with the flood control district as well as the community to acquire this land and to redesign the levees so that any kind of future flooding event, it isn't as catastrophic, and at the same time preserve some of the wildlife habitat and wetlands in the area, as well as preserve some of the agricultural lands just to the south. So that's another exciting project that, if we are successful, will allow us to really think about the entire watershed for the Braro. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has later on in the presentation. Thank you.
Right. Thanks so much, Steve. And then with that, Philip, we'll pass it to you for our final presentation of the session.
Awesome. Thank you, Lucas. It is really a joy to be on today. Philip Howard, Civil Rights People and Places Program Manager. It seems like we're gonna take a completely 180-degree turn into a separate conversation, but there are a lot of similarities if we really look close. We're all telling stories about places and communities and people that live there. And so I like to start with the environment in America prior to the modern civil rights movement. And I start with this picture, and I'm sure most of us know, this is, of course, Emmett Till and his mother. And this period was 1955. In America during that period, a little Black boy, 14 years old, could be pulled out of his grandparents' home in the middle of the night in Mississippi. And the next time he was seen, pulled out of a river with barbed wire tied around him, body mutilated, shot several times, and that was an environment that African Americans found themselves living in before the modern civil rights movement began a few months later with the arrest of Rosa Parks. And so I tell that story just to show, what this period in American history altered and changed and allowed us to move forward toward that more perfect union. So I tell the story of Emmett Till as a way to honor him, and really as a way to tell what the African American community was facing during that time and what they went through leading, moving forward. So next slide, please. So the stories that we're protecting and the people and the places that we're trying to make sure people are aware of and this history was a period between 1955 to 1965, which is what we're focusing in on in Alabama. That period of time encompasses basically the modern civil rights movement that began in Montgomery, Alabama, and that culminated in 1965 with the Voting Rights March from Selma to Montgomery. The homes that we are helping communities and municipalities in Alabama work with are some of the biggest pieces of that civil rights movement history. The home you're looking at right here, I believe, I'm biased. I'm from Alabama. I am from the Black Belt. I love this story. I love this history. This is the home of Coretta Scott King in Marion, Alabama. And Coretta Scott King, I call her the first lady of the civil rights movement. Just a phenomenal figure. Her home right now sits abandoned in this community where we're working with the family and working with organizations to try to find ways to revitalize this home, rehabilitate this home, and make it a jewel in this community, which it is, where people can come and learn about the life of Mrs. King. That front yard you're looking at is the place where her and Dr. King got married. And you know, so the history is there. Coretta Scott King was a phenomenal American, and her life and her story is important to the civil rights movement. So the Conservation Fund is working with the local community here to help protect that home and moving forward. I think the next picture is also of this home. I'm sorry, and moving forward to the this home is another home that the Conservation Fund is partnering with the community in the Black Belt region of Alabama. Some of the poorest communities in the country are in this region of America. And so this is the David Hall home at the David Hall Farm. In 1965, the Voting Rights March, we all are familiar with what happened on Bloody Sunday and the beating on the Edmund Pettus Bridge of the marchers. A lot of people don't know, or a lot of people don't remember, or are not aware, there was a successful march that happened. And if it were not for Mr. David Hall, whose home you see here, a Black farmer that purchased his land in 1940, who allowed the marchers to stay on his property during their 54-mile trek from Selma to Montgomery, we're helping this family, you know, find resources to protect this home, interpret this home, and the farm. And helping them to realize what's possible there, where they would like to see walking trails, interpretive signs, where you're able to come and have an authentic experience, where you're able to come. Oftentimes we read about this history, we talk about it in boardrooms, classrooms across the country, but it kind of makes sense to make sure that we actually go to the place where the history happened and make sure that that is a space that we protect for generations to come, so they can learn about these events that happened in the past that were certainly life-changing events for the African-American community, and really changed America in a number of ways for the better. And the two homes that you just saw played a significant role in that. It tells the story of the African-American experience during a critical time in the history of America, where I believe, and historians have said, the 10-year period between 1955 to 1965 were some of the most important years in American history because of the events that happened. You had iconic events across the state of Alabama, the Montgomery bus boycott, the Freedom Rides, the Birmingham campaign, Project C, where the little children were marching and water hoses were turned on them. And of course, you have the Selma to Montgomery Voting Rights March. And so the Conservation Fund, which I am just so excited about how they have leaned into this work. It is not something that has been, this program started maybe 18 months ago. And they have leaned in with support and really trying to find ways to help these communities tell these stories and protect these sites for future generations. And so we have been on the ground for a short time, but we've made a lot of progress, and there's a lot more to do. But starting with homes like this, the bigger pieces of these stories have been somewhat forgotten. You would think that Coretta Scott King, a well-known figure around the world, her home would be in better condition than what it is, but it is not. And so there's work to do, but we're on the ground and we're leaning in and we're excited about the things that are happening moving forward. And you can go to the next slide. This is another picture in the back of the Coretta Scott King home. So obviously there's distress, there's decay, there's really a need. If we want to preserve this history, and I have not spoken to anyone who does not want this type of history preserved, there has to be a sense of urgency, because if we don't, then we're going to lose these spaces and these communities. And I just find that unacceptable. Next slide, please. So what have we been doing in this 18 months? One of the things that the Conservation Fund really has brought to the table here is connectivity. In the Black Belt region of Alabama, the Black Belt region is made up of 19 counties in Alabama. 5 of those counties, Perry, Dallas, Lowndes, Montgomery, and Macon, house some of the most important events in the civil rights movement. And so what you see in this picture right here, there were 3 African-American farmers that allowed marchers to stay on their property during the Selma to Montgomery March. If it had not been for those farmers, the march would not have happened. If you read the Voting Rights Act of 1965, it says clearly and decisively, because of the Selma to Montgomery March, that the Voting Rights Act came into fruition and was passed in August of 1965. So if it were not for these people in this picture, then that may not have happened. And these families represented in this picture are the Hall family, campsite 1, the Steele family, campsite 2, and the Gardner family, campsite 3. And this picture is the very first time in 58 years that these families had ever even came together and met each other. And the Conservation Fund was responsible for that happening, where we built relationships on the ground with them. We expressed our gratitude for what their family had done. Some of the people in this picture were actually there in 1965 when the march happened. And they tell you the story about how they were retaliated against because of that. Death threats. There was one family had to have FBI protection for a year after their participation. And so you have these stories that are critically important to telling the African-American experience in America. And so the Conservation Fund has leaned all the way in trying to find ways to help these families protect their farms and help them tell the story. And I will just add one quick thing. The Conservation Fund, I'm sure they've done films before, but we were actually a part of the team that put together a film about these families, 54 Miles to Home, that was done a couple of years ago, that has been seen around the country in film festivals. That was the very first time that they shared their stories publicly. They couldn't share their stories publicly. Their families, after the march, basically just went on with their lives. It was dangerous for them to even talk about what they had done. But we were allowed to work with them, and we helped them tell their stories for the first time in the film 54 Miles to Home. So I'm sure we can share that as well in the chat. But the Conservation Fund, the approach that we took in this, this is not acquisition, things that the Conservation Fund is known for. But one of the things that the Conservation Fund supported here was convening partners. And that's what we've been doing successfully here since we've been in this space, bringing in the resources that need to be brought to bear for this history not to be lost. And so we're excited about these families and the story they're telling. And you can go ahead and go to the next slide. this is a very exciting project that we did in the city of Montgomery. This space that you're looking at, this is a community event. This was a park that the city owns that is actually on the actual Selma to Montgomery Trail. The Conservation Fund met with community members who were very, I guess I don't want to say pissed off, but the condition of this space was weeds everywhere, trash everywhere. And the community was fed up with it. The city owns this property, but they did not have a good relationship with the city. And they were just tired of it looking the way that it did. The Conservation Fund worked with partners across the region to bring funding to help the community revitalize this space. And you could just see a small portion of the work that we did with creating pulling weeds, planting new plants, and creating a space where the community could be proud. This is at the corner of Fairview and Oak Street in Montgomery, Alabama, where the Selma to Montgomery March came. When they entered Montgomery, they came to this site. This was the last night of the march, March 24th, 1965. So a very important space for the history of Montgomery. And it was just left, to itself. But we were able to pull together the resources and the community and the partners, and we revitalized this area. And the mayor, when he spoke, the mayor said, this is now the cornerstone of what we hope the city will move toward. And the Conservation Fund played a huge role in that. And we're really excited about that. And the community is excited about it. And we hope to continue to build relationships throughout the trail by doing things like that. And you can go ahead and go to the next slide. Right here in this picture are the 4 mayors of communities in the Black Belt. The Conservation Fund was responsible for convening these mayors and sites from around the region and the state. And this was the very first time these mayors, the mayor of Montgomery, Selma, Marion, and Whitehall, Alabama, they all house some of the most important African-American or iconic civil rights moments in American history. And they had never even come together to have a conversation about how they could collectively tell this story. And the Conservation Fund, once again, we stepped up and we realized that, and we brought the mayors together where they had a conversation about how they can work together to better tell these stories and better connect these stories and connect the communities where they're housed. And from that conversation has led cooperation that people on the ground have really just couldn't believe. That they had not even been in the same room to have that conversation, and we were responsible for bringing them together. That has led to greater connectivity along the Selma to Montgomery National Historic Trail, better connectivity between historical sites in those communities that had never even conversed prior to these types of meetings. And the Conservation Fund was instrumental in making all of that happen. And as we look forward, there is a vision developing around a 2030 goal of complete restoration, rehabilitation, interpretation, preservation planning, conservation planning along these African-American sites. And so we are excited about this effort. It's new, but it has been met with great enthusiasm in rural communities across the state. The mayors that you see picture are excited about what we're trying to do. And we believe that as people become more aware of this history, that's going to drive economic development to these rural communities and help them, with employment opportunities, engage young people about this history, and things like that. So the Conservation Fund has been instrumental in bringing these conversations to the front locally and on a national level. And so we're excited about where we are and excited about where we're going. And I really appreciate you all taking the time to hear more about it today.
Well, thank you all for those really incredible presentations. And I know it's so, as we transition into questions and conversation here, there's so much to think about, both just in terms of the sort of geographic, but also sort of story enormity that is at play here. And one of the common themes to highlight, I think, as the Conservation Fund, is that these are all just such incredibly special and valuable places, and regardless of the particular goal in some cases of what conservation looks like or what outcomes we're looking for at the very end, these are all incredibly special places where we're looking to keep things like natural resources, jobs, equity, and frankly, pride in these communities. So we're really grateful that you all have been are here to listen to these stories and to take part in this journey with us. And with that, we've got about 18 minutes left here. So I'd love to just open it up for questions and comments from the group. If you have a question, please feel free to use the raise hand function on Zoom, or put your question in the chat, and we will be happy to visit it there.
I'm not sure about where's the thing to raise your hand? I'm not Zoom.
It should be under the reaction section, but if you have a question, just go. We can start with you, Tim, if you want to be the first.
Okay, it goes back to Emmy about preserving farmland, and I noticed one of the targeted areas was Philadelphia, and we're a suburb really of Philadelphia, Lower Bucks County, where we just had that horrible, tragic flooding. But there's a big farm, over 100 acres, right across the entrance to our neighborhood, that's up for development. And it's just the beginning stages, but they want to put 72 houses on this 100+ acre farm. And I wonder if there's any way that could get on our radar for preservation. There is the Patterson farm across the street is already preserved, over 100 acres of farmland. But it's just very disturbing that is in the offing. So I'd like if attention could be made to that area.
Yeah, absolutely. My colleague Laura Bauer is part of our Pennsylvania state office, and she's really been leading the work to do the feasibility around launching Farms Fund in the Philly area. So if you want to share information about that farm, I'd be happy to put it in front of her radar. The area has very strong farmland protection partners there, and that's one of the reasons that we're really excited about the opportunity there. So happy to forward information along to her.
Okay, well, I don't know how I could convey that to you. I can give you the specific site.
Yeah, I'm happy to, I know we have our information, Tim. I'm happy to reach out and I can connect all of us, but that's a great point. And again, we're really just getting started. And Philly, so any leads on, particular sites or partners, anything is greatly appreciated. So that would be a huge help.
Okay. I don't want to hog the time. The other concern I just read about was the runoff from Pennsylvania farms affecting the quality of the water in the Chesapeake Bay. And if we're doing anything to address that, the fertilizer and other pollution runoff from roads, neighborhoods, farmland that is affecting the seafood in the Chesapeake Bay.
Yeah, that's a great question too. And we run into that in Illinois as well. I mean, farming, especially industrial farming, can create a lot of water quality issues. As we work with farms, we are transitioning them to conservation planning and conservation practices. So the conservation outcome is really important to us. We are capturing metrics around the conservation outcomes, and we do work with the farmers to implement those practices that help address, runoff and water quality. So that's a big part of our work with USDA, is bringing those USDA resources to the farms and supporting the farmers in getting that stuff on the ground.
What about individuals and like their lawn care and that kind of stuff? Because like I have a pretty extensive garden, but I won't use Roundup. I do everything as naturally as possible, but I also know that the chemicals people spray on their lawns, I've gotten rid of most of my lawn, but that's also a big source of water pollution.
Yeah, it is not something we're addressing through the Farms Fund, but it's definitely a challenge.
Right.
Helena, I see you have your hand raised. We're happy to go next to you. And then if others, again, feel free to keep raising your hands and putting items in the chat.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to say thank you to all the panelists for sharing these amazing stories about the projects. My question is, you all have such different professional backgrounds, but you all are incredibly accomplished conservationists. So tell us how some of the skills or experiences you have gained have influenced your approach to conservation. I mean, the question is it can be answered by any of you. Yeah.
I'll give it a shot. Yeah, I started with the Nature Conservancy back in 1986. And so I have been unbelievably fortunate in working around the country with a variety of communities. And I think I can very honestly say with every project, I learned something new. And most of that comes from the feedback I get in working with landowners and communities that all have different issues, all have issues that are very important to them. And one of the great things about the Conservation Fund is that we are able to work in a variety of communities, a variety of settings to really help them solve their problems. And it's incredibly rewarding. And I think it helps for all of us to know that when we get up in the morning, there's going to be a new problem to solve. And so that's why we work here. So thanks for the question, and thanks for being part of the panel. We really appreciate it.
And look, I can jump in and just say, for me, I have a military law enforcement background. Like I said, I'm a son of the Black Belt region from Alabama. And once I started learning more about the current conditions of civil rights sites across the state, it's like I left my position at the U.S. Attorney's Office last year, and I have not worked a day since. I absolutely love the challenge of trying to work with these communities and come up with conservation plans, preservation plans. I love the conversations that we have, the history and the education that they're providing. And I think it's critically important that these stories are remembered. These properties and lands is protected, and for future generations to learn about the great people who were responsible for some very important acts of bravery and courage and sacrifice to make this country better. We know a lot about the people who were on the wrong side of that argument. We know very little about those small community members who were instrumental in making some important things happen and changing the landscape for not just African Americans, but all minorities, and making this country as great as it could be. So yeah, it's an absolute joy to work in this space, and I am just indebted to the Conservation Fund for believing in this work and being supportive of it. It has meant a lot to a lot of people because we brought the Conservation Fund has brought a level of expertise that has been missing. And there are a lot of people who are grateful for that. And I'm grateful to be a part of it as well.
And Philip, I can feel your passion, to this work. And I know this is like a new for the Conservation Fund. Do you think are the fund or you going to touch any new geographies where you hope the program can play a role?
Yes, that is a great question. We hope that we're building a model that can be used in other communities. One of the great things about this, and the Conservation Fund, my immediate supervisor, Andrew Schock, was really great. The approach that we took was we went on the ground to the community first. We did not talk to municipal leaders. We did not talk to state leaders. We went to the community and the people, and we started relationships there. And this history is something Alabama, of course, I'm an Alabama boy, so I just think we hold a significant role in civil rights history. But there's also history, Native American history, Chinese American history. We're hoping we're building a model to how we actually can engage with these communities and not tell them what to do, but walk alongside of them to make sure that their history is preserved and told in a way that they would like it to be, presented. And that has been a great joy here, where we don't come with the answers, we just come with a listening ear. And the community has provided us the guidance and the direction, and we just follow. And we try to use the resources of a conservation fund to apply to these challenges and issues. And it has been supremely rewarding and just an awesome experience. So people say I'm passionate about it. I benefited from it. I'm an African-American man who, my family, we benefited from these people and their acts of courage. And it's just been a complete honor to be in this space and to be able to tell these stories and help protect these spaces and do this work. So I can go on, but yes, it is a joy to be in this space.
Thank you.
All right, I think we've got time, probably just two more questions. So Tim, I'll pass it to you, and then Mary, I have your hand raised. We'll have you ask the last question.
Actually, two just brief things. I forget the second speaker's name, but in California, about the growing of strawberries. And I've read so often about the best things to buy organic because the level of pesticides used, and strawberries are like always topping the list because so many pesticides are used on strawberries. And the other thing I was concerned about too, I'm so thrilled to hear about the Black Belt that I was unaware of. And I'm just wondering too if they're addressing anything with infrastructure for sewage and the lack of proper septic tanks and all sorts of really horrible problems related to poisoning from people's lack of ability to deal with sewage properly.
Hi, Tim. I can address the issue in California. Yeah, so the Garrett Ranch project was that first project that were strawberry fields. And part of our intervention to buy the Garrett Ranch property was to also facilitate its transition to being organic strawberries.
Oh.
So a portion of it was already as organic, but our purchasing the property and then having a conservation easement in place that preserves its transition to an organic farm was a big reason for our intervention. And part of the reason we're able to do that is because there is a great market for organic strawberries and it's growing. Garrett Ranch is literally across the road from Driscoll Farms, and they couldn't wait to work with us to make sure that that was maintained as an organic farm. that's definitely where things are headed. And obviously that helps with the water quality in the Pajaro River as well. So thank you for that question.
Oh, great. Thanks.
And I would just jump in real quickly, Tim. Yes, we are working with the communities, and I think you're referencing Lowndes County, which is a truly historic county in the Black Belt region, where they are having those issues with sewage. And so we're hoping that this work is going to bring more attention to that, bring more investors into these communities to have, to help solve that problem. And we believe that protecting these sites will increase tourism, will increase people coming to the region, will enlarge the tax base, will have an economic development stimulus for this region, and those types of issues can be addressed moving forward. So we're all connected and trying to uplift every story that we can, and that's one that's certainly on the agenda.
Well, great. Good luck. Wish you well.
All right. Just quickly, I'll pass it to you, Mary, for the last question.
It is a quick question, both for the Black Belt gentleman and the gentleman from San Diego, since that's where I am. Yeah, that's where I am in San Diego. Did the Conservation Fund have anything to do with that beach in Santa Monica that was stolen from that whole Black family? And now they finally are going to do something to give them back either give back the beach or give the money to whatever. Does anybody remember that happening in the last year or so?
Yes.
It was taken from them in the 20s or 30s. The family, he had a thriving business, and then the city said, yeah, eminent domain, we want that. Did the Conservation Fund have anything to do with getting it back to that family? I'm just curious.
I can answer that question. No, we didn't have anything to do with that. We knew the project and how it was going on, and we're supportive, but nothing directly.
Thank you.
Was it called Manhattan Beach?
I think it was somebody's name, like, Billy's Beach, or I think it was the owner's first name. I can't remember it now, though.
I did read about that several times.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for staying with us through this hour to learn about all of these projects and just generally the fund's work across the country. It's always fun when we came in with a list of 3 projects, and I think we've touched on even more geographies and current and past projects along the way, which is always great. And just I think it is just such a really critical time, as we've talked about, for the conservation movement. And as someone said, in the chat, I'm gonna quote them here. It has to include all kinds of land, water, and people and places, which I think is a really important way to be looking at this. So we're really grateful to have you in our corner right now. This is, and just so you all know, this is the first of an ongoing series of virtual gatherings that we're holding to connect directly with our supporters and our allies and our progress in the months and frankly years ahead. So I hope that you'll keep just an eye on more opportunities to learn about our programming, both through, opportunities we'll keep you posted on through email, but please do consider, if you haven't already, subscribing to our newsletter and following us on social media, so you can be the first to know about all of these great things that we're working on across the country. Just, in closing, thank you all for everything you do to participate in the Conservation Fund's work. We're looking forward to seeing you again soon at one of these and continuing this conversation. You have my contact information, so please don't hesitate to reach out if I can answer a question about something we're working on. But just in the meantime, see you soon and hope you all have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks.